We're going to now go to Jo. Jo Burden has lived and worked in England, Germany, Bahamas, Australia, and Malta. From these bases, she has visited many other parts of the world. She has lived her life in the tension between the academic and the practical, and is now a citizen arts worker living in Valletta, Malta. She has degrees from Birmingham, UK, UWA, Masters in Women's Studies in Perth, Australia, Griffith, a PhD in Brisbane, Australia, and Malta, a Masters in Mediterranean Studies. Welcome, and over to you.
What I'm hoping to do in the 20 minutes available to me is to pick out some of the key moments in the early stages of my 80 years of life, when I came to understand a little more of the gender imperatives that have shaped my life, even whilst I resisted them. So I guess I'm coming from the perspective of my personal is political, you know, that kind of elderly feminist perspective. So I'm going to start with Washing Up in Malta, which is this book that I wrote when I first came to live in Malta. I started when I finished full-time paid work and was thinking about where I wanted to live in old age. I thought I would come back and live in Malta, which I was thinking was small enough for me not to have a car, and I would be able to get around. That actually hasn't worked out in many ways. I don't have a car, but it's not easy. Anyway, one of the things I started doing when I came back to live in Malta and didn't have full-time paid work anymore, was that I started writing, and I started writing autofiction. If I don't know if people know about autofiction, but it's when you acknowledge that memory is fallible, that we fill in the gaps, we try and answer some of the questions that we haven't been able to answer beforehand. So that's what I started doing. And again, this is me, this little girl here, and this is my mum next to me. And we're kind of in Scotland in the vegetable patch there. So as I say, I live now in my flat in Valletta, Malta. I moved here from Brisbane, Australia in 2008, when I retired from full-time paid work as an academic in community cultural development. At that time, I took up writing autofiction, and Washing Up in Malta is the result of that. But I also started traveling, well, not started traveling, I'd been traveling all my life. I started traveling around the littoral of the Mediterranean Sea. You can maybe see this map behind me, which is actually a chart of the Mediterranean Sea. And Malta is way over here in the middle. And I've actually now traveled all the way around the whole littoral of the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm working that into a series of 3 books about that. And the first one I've just heard today has come back from the printer, which is great news. And it's called Middle Sea Dreaming, Short Stories on a Long Journey. And the first one is series 1, and I've called it Pharaohs and Saints. And this is the introduction, the prologue for Middle Sea Dreaming. I'm going to read it for you. In the time of the pandemic, I became a seabird, winging the tide lines of my memories. I hovered from one rearrangement to another as I sorted the flotsam of my life and discovered new connections between time past and time present. Sometimes bursts of rage at inanimate objects and incompetent world leaders blew me into a dizzying spiral of babble. Other times, I lingered for hours over old photos or a tiny memory that flew across the Middle Sea and into my window. Solitude was not the problem. I've lived my life alone. The problem was confinement. So I sat at my window and watched the sea change color and shape against the stone of the harbor wall. My memories changed shape in harmony with the waves, and new stories washed up along the tide line. Could I find my own dreaming of this sea that surrounds my home and opens out my confinement? When Odysseus set off on his journey around the Middle Sea, he left Penelope, faithful wife, at home in Ithaca. He fought for the rescue of Helen. He resisted the temptations of sirens. He succumbed to the immortal Calypso and was confined, like me, in Malta. In between his female distractions, Odysseus committed heroic and murderous deeds that are told and retold around the world in tidy stories. On his return home, he killed every one of the 100 suitors carousing in Penelope's front room during his absence, and he hanged the 12 maids who had serviced them. I killed neither monsters nor humans on my travels around the Middle Sea, and no one waited patiently at home in Malta for my return. I tell an old woman's story, born in the memories of a lifetime, foreshadowed by an inevitable end, seasoned by the dreaming of the Middle Sea. The book goes on to tell the story of my travels in Egypt, Libya, Tunis, and Italy, with periods of reflection in Malta, when I try to find out about the stories of women that are missing from the public spaces of museums and streets. I contend that the Mediterranean imaginary has been built on the stories told by men, and we will never change that unless we discover and refer to the stories of women down the ages and into the present. So that is my project now, and I particularly appreciate the Sunday session of WDI when we engage with the women who have written and theorized the stories of women down the ages. My second book is called Songs for a Blind Date, and is about sexuality in older age. Here is a song that I wrote at that time and included in the book. Now, I'm going to try and sing these songs as long as my voice holds out, but it may be that I have to stop and read it like a poem. This one's called Menopause Blues. I've got the sun on my back, the moon in my eyes, and my head feels a little unclear. I'm at the dawn of the night, the wane of the day, and I wait for a star to appear. Menopause blues, I got the menopause blues, and I don't really know where I stand. Menopause blues, I got the menopause blues, and I look to a future unplanned. I've got the crone in my head, Aphrodite in my heart, and Venus at play on my mound. I mourn the death of my womb, the droop of my breast, and the hot flush that makes my heart pound. Menopause blues, I kick the menopause blues when I stand up and sing out my song. Menopause blues, I kick the menopause blues when I learn how the years make me strong. So not very strong, but maybe gets the idea across.
I'm going to do some clapping just so everybody's saying you are adorable, fantastic. You keep going.
I refuse adorable. I have to say that. Sorry. But thank you for that. So that's later in life, but I want to starting out. My mother told me when I recorded her stories as a prelude to washing up in Malta that I was a wanderer as soon as I could crawl, and that I resisted frilly dresses. In today's world of conflation of gender and sex, I would have been targeted immediately as a candidate for hormones. Luckily, my parents were more interested in raising all their children as independent and resourceful. I grew up with an older and younger brother, and when I was 6, we returned to live in Malta, where my mother was born. My parents loved each other profoundly, but generally conformed to gender expectations. My father's paid work determined the location and pattern of the household, and his boat building hobby consumed much of his home time. My mother created that home wherever we moved to, and she took care of all our needs. It was only in later life that I realized that my brothers were interpreting things differently from me. For example, when my mother was preparing our dinner, my dad used to come up from the boat shed and join her in the kitchen with drinks. I used to love this time because they seemed so happy, laughing and talking as the meal was prepared. It was only later that I learned from my older brother, who was resentful of his perceived role in looking after his younger siblings, that he hated this time because he wanted his dinner and my father was delaying that. My mother also carved out her own time when my father was at work and we were at school. But when she wanted to learn to drive, my dad did not encourage her. And she was in her late 30s before she gained the independence of her own small car to drive. Driving became a significant part of an independent life, particularly after my dad died at quite a young age. But I want to mention a couple of significant realizations from my childhood. I used to play cricket with my brothers in the street near our house, where there was a high wall around the garden of a convent. When my brothers hit the ball over the wall, they used to make me stand in front of the door whilst they rang the bell and ran away, leaving me to ask for the return of the ball. I never really understood why they were so afraid of these kindly women who tried to help me. As you probably know, Malta is a very Roman Catholic nation state, and I have come to realize that religion is one of the systems that has helped to construct the subordination of women. Malta is one of the few European states that remain anti-abortion. However, religion did not feature in my upbringing. When I first started school in Malta, my teacher asked me what religion I was so that I could go to the appropriate assembly in the morning. I had no idea. So she guessed from my dark eyes and dark hair that I was Roman Catholic. I struggled to copy the strange gestures the other kids were making as they recited things I had never heard before. When I got home that evening, I asked my father, and he said, just tell them you're Church of Scotland. Religion for me became something you put on a form until in later life, they stopped asking for that information. But my lack of religious framing meant that I was never subjected to those particular imperatives. Later in primary school, I experienced my first win in changing the system. Every year, the school held a cross-country run, but only for the older boys. By this time, I was an older girl. I had often gone running with my dad and my brothers, so I couldn't understand why girls couldn't run. So my friend Cinders and I asked our teacher, the wonderful Miss Cassidy, and yes, we did call her Hopalong. She was surprised, but did not dismiss our request. She took it to the headmaster, and we were allowed to run. Cinders and I ran the course side by side until the final stretch, when Cinders started sprinting and my shoe broke, so I had to finish with one shoe on and one shoe off. We didn't win, but we were well ahead of many of the boys, and we had broken a barrier. We returned to England and were living in Lincolnshire by the time I had my first period. I knew all about it because I was at an all-girls school and we had sex education lessons. Still, I wasn't prepared for a stream of blood down my legs when I got up in the morning. I called my mother for help, and she got all excited and raced out of the room, declaring to everyone, including my brothers, that Jo has become a woman. I just wanted to deal with the immediate problem of bleeding all over the carpet. Later that day, I complained to my mother that it wasn't fair. And why don't boys get periods too? She responded in a way that I didn't understand at the time, and only later in life recognized as an honest attempt to distinguish the physical differences between women and men. She said, they do. At night time, they have nocturnal emissions. I had no idea what she meant, but didn't ask further. Thinking back, it's an interesting alignment of the inconvenience of bodily fluids. Here's a song I wrote much later in life when I was working in women's community theatre. And this one's called Starting Out. When a girl starts out, the circle sings, for her life holds others in her soul. And I'm going to carry on reading because my voice really is gone. When a girl starts out, her mother cries for her own sad longing to be free. When a girl starts out, she cries and sings, for both joy and pain are in her choice. I won't go into the full saga of discovering my sexuality. I write about it in both my first books, nor do I have time to get into the ways in which my personal experiences of the stages of my life have influenced my research topics. Although I might just say at this point, because I understand I've got a little bit of more time than I thought, that my first master's degree in University of Western Australia, and it was in women's studies, and I think Sheila came to lecture us once, was actually about women, and it was using qualitative research interviews. But at that stage of my life, I had just got to a point where I'd kind of realized that I was not going to have children. I didn't I inverted commas chose not to have children at that point. But my research was actually about that decision made by young women. So I talked to women who were having and bringing up babies on their own, women who were married and had babies, and women who were married, and by married at that time I mean to a man, and had not had babies at that point. And what I was asking about was how they managed to negotiate their leisure, but that's another story. And I might just add that my PhD at Griffith University in Brisbane was again about that stage of life that I'd reached after 50. And I did 3 cycles of action research with older women, in which we drew on their stories to make theatre about how the so-called empty nest syndrome and losing a partner either through divorce or death were actually liberating for these women. They kind of started to explore all the things that they had put on the back burner all through their lives in order to bring up their children and look after their household. Anyway, let me just give one more story from the early part of my life. After I graduated with my first degree in physical education and psychology and avoided my first marriage commitments, I applied to teach physical education in Bahamas. I captained the Bahamas hockey team in the Caribbean Games. A male friend of mine, who was also a hockey coach, came to watch the match. Afterwards, he said to me, "You play hockey like a man." Now, he meant it as a compliment, but even then I knew there was something wrong, although I said nothing. I was a woman and I played hockey well, but at that stage I couldn't articulate that. So I'm going to finish with another song that I wrote for one of the community theatre shows that we group devised. And this show was called Fire Talk, and it was about, it showed a group of women, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, sitting around a campfire and telling stories about their lives. And I wrote this song and actually sang it in this community theatre thing. I'm not going to sing it now because I'm really, yes, my voice is going completely. So it's actually called the Virgin Song. And this is how it goes. Stories about virgins are few in Australia, unless you're the mother of God. So here is a story to help you remember that virgins are made, they're not born. And I'll go on reading. For Virgo in Latin is not about hymens, it's more about woman herself. It's all about action. It's all about choosing. A virgin's a woman herself. Yes, Virgo is woman unto herself. She chooses her lovers, doesn't wait to be asked. And sometimes she chooses to sleep on her own, because lovers distract her from changing the world. Sometimes we virgins feel tired and alone. We have to find our way. Our way is hidden by clankings of heroes and tales about maidens distressed. We've lost all the stories about virgins of passion who are spinning a path for themselves, the stories of artists and writers of songs who make the world different by telling their tales. So all of you mothers who carry the world, we virgins are thankful if that's what you choose. But when you are through with the saving of man, we virgins are ready to welcome you home. We'll have a nice cup of tea.